In my 28 years practicing emergency medicine in Portland, Oregon, I believed I had developed an immunity to shock. I had resuscitated teenagers who overdosed in gas station bathrooms. I had delivered death notifications to parents who arrived at my ER, expecting to pick up a child and left carrying something they would never put down. I had held the hands of strangers in their final moments and driven home at dawn without crying, because crying was a luxury a trauma physician couldn't afford on shift. My colleagues used to say I had the steadiest hands in the department and the coldest nerve they'd ever seen in a doctor. I retired at 61, believing that was still true. I was wrong. The call came at 11:47 on a Thursday night in February, which I know precisely because I had been unable to sleep and was sitting at my kitchen table in Bend reading a cardiology journal when my phone lit up with my granddaughter's name. She was 16. She never called me this late. She barely called me at all. We were a texting family, the way most families with teenagers are now, so when I saw her name on that screen, something in my chest tightened before I even answered. "Grandpa." Her voice was compressed, like she was trying to take up as little air as possible. "I need you to come to Street Charles. I'm in the emergency department." I was already standing. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Marcus said I fell down the stairs. He told Mom I was running in my socks and I tripped. A pause, and I could hear her breath catch. "But Grandpa, I didn't fall." He pushed me. And I hit the railing and I think my arm is broken, and Mom keeps agreeing with everything he says and nobody here is listening to me. The cold that moved through me then was not the professional detachment I had cultivated over 3 decades. It was something older and more animal. I heard my own voice come out low and deliberate, the voice I used when I needed a panicking patient to focus. "I'm leaving right now. Do not say anything else until I get there. I'll be 20 minutes. Mom's going to tell them I can imagine things sometimes." She already said it to the nurse. "Grandpa, she's going to. I know. I hear you. I believe you." 20 minutes. I drove to Street Charles Medical Center in 14. My daughter had remarried 18 months ago. Her second husband, Marcus Holt, was a commercial real estate developer with an office downtown and a boat he kept at Elk Lake and a smile that appeared whenever you needed it to and disappeared the moment it was no longer useful. He had seemed, when I first met him at the small dinner my daughter arranged to introduce us, like a man who had learned very carefully how to seem. I had noticed the performance quality of his warmth, the way it was dialed up precisely to the level required and not 1 degree beyond. I had filed this observation away and said nothing, because my daughter was happy for the first time since her divorce, and I had not trusted my instincts enough. I was trusting them now. The charge nurse at the ER entrance recognized me from my years of sending patients through those doors. I explained who I was there for, and she gave me the particular look that emergency nurses reserve for situations they cannot articulate directly, something careful and communicative and worried. She told me my granddaughter was in Bay 9 with her mother and stepfather, and that the attending physician had been very thorough with her examination. I thanked her and walked, not ran, because running announces alarm to everyone in the room and I needed the advantage of appearing calm. The curtain to Bay 9 was pulled 3/4 closed. I could hear Marcus's voice before I stepped in, smooth, explanatory, the patient tone of a man who expects to be believed and usually is. He was telling someone that she had always been a little careless, that her mother had mentioned it, that teenagers move too fast and don't think about consequences. I stopped outside the curtain for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to hear the shape of what he was doing. And then I stepped in. My granddaughter's face when she saw me was the face of someone who had been underwater and just broke the surface. Her left arm was braced and wrapped in a temporary splint. There was a bruise forming along her jaw on the left side that had no business being there from a staircase fall, and her right eye was slightly swollen at the outer corner. She was sitting very still in the way that people sit when they're in more pain than they're admitting. My daughter stood beside the bed with her arms crossed, and I could see the tension in her shoulders from the door. She was 41, and she looked tired in a way that wasn't just tonight. Marcus stood near the foot of the bed, dressed for someone who'd been pulled from an important evening rather than someone who'd been home when this happened. He turned to look at me, with an expression of relieved welcome. "Richard." He extended his hand. Thank God you're here. She's been asking for you. It's been a stressful night. I shook his hand because refusing would have put him on alert, and I needed him relaxed. What happened? She was coming down the stairs in her socks, he began. I'd like to hear from her. I said it pleasantly, turning to my granddaughter. She looked at Marcus before she looked at me. The look lasted less than a second, but it told me everything about the dynamic in that household. Then she looked at her hands. I slipped, she said, and her voice was flat in a way that had nothing to do with lying and everything to do with having been told what to say. On the stairs, Marcus nodded with the expression of a man whose account has just been confirmed. The attending physician appeared 2 minutes later, a woman in her mid-40s with the economical movements of someone who had been on shift since morning. Her name tag read, Dr. Angela Reyes, and she acknowledged me with a brief nod when I introduced myself as a retired emergency physician. I'd like to speak with you and the family about the injury, she said, and she said it to me and my daughter both, and then her eyes moved to Marcus in a way that was professionally neutral and told me she'd already formed an opinion. She asked Marcus and my daughter if they'd give her a moment with the patient. Marcus said, of course, that he'd get coffee for everyone, that there was no rush. My daughter hesitated, then followed him out. I stayed. Dr. Reyes pulled the curtain and lowered her voice. You're her grandfather? 28 years, emergency medicine, OHSU, retired 14 months ago. She absorbed this and seemed to make a decision. The arm fracture is consistent with impact against a hard surface. The railing, potentially, or a wall. The bruising on her jaw and periorbital area is not consistent with a staircase fall. The jaw contusion shows a contact pattern. Something made direct contact with her face. She paused. She hasn't confirmed anything with her mother present, but she's been guarding her ribs on the right side in a way that suggests additional injury she hasn't disclosed. Has she said anything to you directly? She said she slipped. She said it the same way each time, which is how people say things they've been instructed to say. Dr. Reyes met my eyes. I've documented everything. Photographs, detailed clinical notes, injury mapping, but her mother is supporting the stated account, and the patient isn't contradicting her. My options are constrained. I turned to my granddaughter. She was looking at the wall. Sweetheart. I sat in the chair beside the bed. Your mom and Marcus are getting coffee. It's just us and Dr. Reyes. I need you to tell me exactly what happened tonight. Not the version Marcus told. The actual version. You called me because you needed someone to believe you. I believe you. So tell me. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her chin trembled and she pressed her lips together hard to stop it. We were arguing about my phone, she said finally. He put parental controls on it last week without telling me, and he could see all my texts, and I found out, and I told him that was wrong, that he didn't have the right to do that, because he's not my dad, and She stopped, drew a breath. He said I was disrespectful and ungrateful, and that my real dad was a failure who couldn't take care of himself, let alone me. And I told him not to talk about my dad like that. Her real father, my son-in-law, had died of a heart attack at 43. She had been 13. And then he grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward him, and I tried to get away, and I scratched his arm when I was pulling back. And he hit me, open-handed, but hard, across the face. And then he shoved me into the wall, and I hit the railing on the way down. She was looking at her lap. When Mom came out, she saw me on the floor, and Marcus was already in his concerned voice, telling her I'd been running, that he'd tried to catch me. Dr. Reyes was making notes on her tablet. Has he hit you before? I asked. She shook her head, then reconsidered. He's grabbed me. A lot. My arm, my shoulder. Gets in my face when he's angry. But not hit me. Not until tonight. Has he been controlling? With your mom? With the house? She almost laughed. But it came out wrong. He tells Mom what to eat. He goes through her email. Last summer she was supposed to go to Aunt Diane's wedding, and he said there was a work thing and she couldn't go. She missed her own sister's wedding. A pause. I heard them arguing about it. He told her that if she went, it would tell him everything he needed to know about where her priorities were, and she didn't go. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "You're not going home tonight. I'm going to make sure of that. Mom will want me to. I know. Let me handle your mom. What about Marcus? He's good at." She searched for the word. "He makes it sound so reasonable. Whatever he says." He made it sound completely reasonable to the nurse, and she was nodding along and I was standing right there. "I know that type," I said. "I've seen them before. They're very good in the short term, but they leave evidence, and evidence doesn't care how reasonable you sound." What I did not tell her yet was that I was already running a clinical pattern analysis in my head, the same process I had applied to confusing presentations for nearly 3 decades. One incident can be an accident. A pattern is a diagnosis. I found my daughter and Marcus in the family waiting area. My daughter looked up with the expression of a woman who wants very badly for everything to be fine and has decided, consciously or not, to assist that outcome by not looking too closely at anything. Marcus had 2 paper cups of coffee and offered me one with a smile. "She's pretty shaken up," he said. "Teenagers take these things hard. The embarrassment more than the pain. Usually. She has a contusion on her jaw that isn't consistent with a staircase fall." I said it quietly, without inflection, watching his face. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt. Calculation. He recovered it in under a second and replaced it with concern. "She might have hit the banister on the way down. I wasn't right there when it happened. I heard it. You told the nurse you tried to catch her." A pause. Just slightly too long. I was nearby. I reached for her, but I wasn't fast enough. I turned to my daughter. "I'd like to take her to stay with me for a few days while her arm heals. She'll be more comfortable. And honestly, you both need rest after a night like this." My daughter started to speak. Marcus spoke first. "Richard, I think she really needs to be home. She needs her mom right now. You understand." He said it warmly. He said it the way you say something to a reasonable man who will respond to reason. He had correctly identified me as someone who would not be rattled by social pressure, and had immediately switched tactics to framing it as concern rather than control. "What she needs," I said, equally warmly, "is her wrist properly managed, her pain controlled, and a few days of rest without disruption. I'm a physician. There's no better place for her." I looked at my daughter. "You look exhausted, sweetheart. Let me take some of the load." I watched my daughter's face move through several things. Relief was genuinely there, which told me she had been working hard tonight to hold things together. Marcus put his hand on her back, placed it, I noted, not laid it, and I watched her posture shift almost imperceptibly toward compliant. "It's only a few days," I said to her. "Not him. I'll send you updates every few hours." "Of course," Marcus said, before she could answer. "Whatever helps her heal fastest." He produced the smile again, the one calibrated for reasonableness, and I looked at it the way I used to look at an EKG strip that was showing me something it didn't want me to see. Getting my granddaughter discharged took another hour. During that time, Marcus took a call outside and paced the length of the parking lot in a way that was effortful rather than organic. My daughter fussed over the discharge paperwork. "Doctor, Reyes found me briefly at the nursing station and told me she would be consulting with the hospital's patient advocate team in the morning, that she wanted to document the case formally, regardless of how the family proceeded." I thanked her and meant it. In my car, driving through the dark toward my house on the west side of Bend, my granddaughter sat with her splinted arm in her lap and her head against the window and didn't speak for 5 minutes. Then she said, "She's not going to leave him, maybe not right away. She chose him tonight, right in front of me. I know, and she's going to have to live with that." I glanced at her. "But you don't have to." My house had a guest room that still held some of the furniture from when my own children were young, and she curled up in the bed with her arm elevated on a pillow, and her face finally relaxed from the tightness it had held all night. I sat in the kitchen and opened my laptop and began making notes with the same precision I had applied to complex cases for 28 years. Timeline, statements, clinical observations, injury documentation. I wrote down, "Everything, doctor." Reyes had told me, and everything my granddaughter had told me, and my own assessment of Marcus Holt across every interaction I had witnessed. Then I started doing what I used to do when a diagnosis wasn't presenting clearly. I looked for the history. Marcus Holt had moved to Bend from Sacramento 4 years ago. His LinkedIn profile showed a steady career in commercial real estate and a board membership with a local business development committee. His Facebook profile was a gallery of community involvement, charity golf tournaments, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, a smiling photograph taken at a school fundraiser. On the surface, Marcus Holt was exactly what he appeared to be. I had learned over a long year that surfaces are written for audiences. His first marriage had ended in Sacramento 11 years ago. I found this through a basic public records search, the kind anyone can run. The divorce record was public. What was not public was the story behind it. But people generally have stories, and stories have witnesses. It took me 2 days and 3 phone calls through a network of old colleagues, the kind you accumulate over a career. People who know how to find someone without causing alarm to locate his ex-wife. She had remarried and was living in Folsom and worked in hospital administration. When I finally reached her, I told her my name, my background, and that my granddaughter had been hurt. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to be its own answer. "He hit her?" she said. "Yes." Another silence. He was careful never to leave marks where I could document them. It took me 3 years to understand what was happening to me, because he was so good at making me believe I was the problem. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the effort in the steadiness. He never touched my son, but he made my son's life very small. The control, the monitoring, the way he would punish things indirectly. Suddenly, an activity got canceled. A friend wasn't welcome at the house anymore, and it was always framed as a reasonable decision that I should be able to see the sense of, "Did you ever report it?" I reported it once. He had 2 colleagues come forward to say I had seemed unstable and volatile for months. He brought photographs of a hole in our bedroom wall that I had made during an argument, blown up and framed like evidence. A short breath. He is extremely good at preparation. He never acts without having already built the story he's going to tell afterward. I asked if she would be willing to write a brief statement not for police. Not yet. Just for documentation. She said she would think about it. She said she had a good life now and a son who was doing well, and that she had spent years trying not to look backward. I said, I understood. I said that sometimes looking backward is the only way to prevent the same thing from happening to someone else's family. She said she would call me tomorrow. She called me that same night. By the 5th day, my granddaughter had told me more than she had told anyone. She told me about the dinner where Marcus had made a quiet comment about her weight and then watched her put down her fork. She told me about the time he had gone through her backpack and found a note from a friend and read it aloud to her mother in a tone of amused concern. She told me about the night she overheard him tell her mother that her first husband had been a weak man and that she shouldn't be surprised their daughter had inherited his tendency toward drama. She told me she had tried to tell her mother twice. The first time, her mother said Marcus was still adjusting to having a teenager and that she needed to be patient. The second time, her mother had gone quiet and then said, "Please don't ask me to choose." She had not tried a third time. On the 6th day, I invited my daughter to lunch. She came alone, which told me she either hadn't told Marcus or had told him, and he'd judged it strategic to let her go. She arrived looking like someone who had been rehearsing an argument all morning. She sat across from me at a restaurant table, and before I could speak, she said, "I know what you're going to say. Then I'll save us both some time." I put a folder on the table. That's Dr. Reyes's clinical documentation. Those photographs are the injuries she recorded. The injury pattern on her jaw is a contact strike, not a fall. The rib bruising she didn't tell you about is consistent with impact against a wall or hard surface. I slid the folder toward her, but didn't open it for her. I also spoke with his ex-wife. My daughter's face went carefully still. She described the same pattern: escalating control, financial monitoring, isolation from family, and physical intimidation that was always explained away or hidden. Her son was affected. I paused. She got out. She said it took her too long to see it, because he was so good at making her feel like the problem. "You had no right," she started. "I had every right. She is my granddaughter. She called me from the emergency room at midnight because she had nowhere else to turn. And the reason she had nowhere else to turn is that the adults who were supposed to protect her didn't. I said it without anger, because anger was the wrong tool here. I'm not saying you're a bad mother. I'm saying he has been very deliberate about getting you to that position where you couldn't see clearly. That is what these people do. I have watched it in the ER for almost 30 years. My daughter was looking at the folder without opening it. Her hands were flat on the table. He monitors your email, I said. He controlled whether you went to your sister's wedding. He has been gradually making your world smaller, and you haven't noticed because he makes each individual step sound reasonable. A pause. And now, he has hit your daughter. She scratched him. The words came out before she could stop them, and I could see from her face that she knew immediately what they revealed. She closed her eyes. She scratched him, pulling away from him, grabbing her wrist. I said quietly, "Scratch marks on an adult man's forearm are not provocation. They are a child trying to escape." The silence lasted a long time. A server refilled water glasses and left without speaking. Outside the window, Bend traffic moved in the ordinary way of a day when nothing is happening. "I've been telling myself," my daughter said, and her voice was different now, less rehearsed, more exhausted, that it wasn't as bad as I thought, that I was being oversensitive, that she was being a difficult teenager and he was just struggling to connect with her. She finally opened the folder and looked at the first photograph, and her face did something I had only seen it do twice before in her life. "Oh God, I know. She didn't tell me about her ribs. She didn't tell you because the last 2 times she tried to tell you, the situation didn't improve." My daughter put her face in her hands. I did not rush the silence. I had learned a long time ago that the moment after someone finally sees something clearly is not a moment to fill with words. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her expression had settled into something resolute. "What do I do? First, you tell me you understand what has been happening. Not some softened version of it. What has been happening?" She held my gaze. "He has been hurting my daughter and isolating me, and I let it go on because I didn't want to see it." "Yes. What do I do?" she asked again, and this time she meant the logistics. I told her. I walked her through every step the way I used to walk families through difficult diagnoses, with clarity, without false comfort, with the emphasis on what was actionable. I called Greg Vasquez, a retired Portland police detective who had spent 15 years in the family violence unit and who now consulted on cases when former colleagues needed guidance. He walked us through the reality. "The medical documentation was strong, Doctor. Reyes had already filed a formal report with the state's child welfare agency, which triggered an investigation regardless of what the family decided. The ex-wife's willingness to provide a written statement established a pattern. With my granddaughter willing to give her own account, and she was more willing every day. As the fear receded and the relief of being believed settled in, the foundation was substantial. Marcus retained a lawyer within 48 hours of my daughter asking him to leave the house. The lawyer sent a letter suggesting that a troubled teenager had fabricated an incident to break up a stable marriage, that the grandfather was a controlling figure who had never accepted the new family structure, and that the documented instability in my granddaughter's behavior at school constituted a relevant context for interpreting her account. I had been expecting something similar. Greg had told me, "These cases hinge on pattern and corroboration. One teenager making an accusation against a persuasive, professionally successful adult is a contest. 3 voices, medical documentation, and a behavioral history across multiple households is a weight that tips differently." The ex-wife submitted her written statement. My granddaughter gave her account to the state investigator quietly, precisely, with the kind of specificity that investigators recognize as memory rather than construction. "Doctor, Reyes testified to the clinical inconsistency between the stated mechanism and the documented injuries. Marcus's lawyer tried to discredit the ex-wife as bitter and the timeline of her statement as too convenient. The investigator asked Marcus to explain the specific injury pattern on my granddaughter's jaw. He said she might have hit a step edge on the way down. The investigator asked how her fall trajectory would have resulted in a contact injury to only one side of her face, with no abrasion to the nose or forehead. Marcus said he wasn't a medical expert. The investigator said she had 3 of them. The criminal process moved slowly. the way it always does. There were months of hearings and filings and delays that tried the patience of everyone except Marcus's legal team, which billed by the hour and had every incentive to extend. My granddaughter went to therapy twice a week and started sleeping better, and stopped checking her phone with the particular tensed anticipation of someone waiting for a threat. My daughter filed for divorce. Marcus fought it the same way Greg had predicted, viciously, methodically, trying to reframe every piece of documented reality as evidence of his wife's instability and her daughter's manipulation. He was good at it. He had practiced being good at it. But in the end, the medical record doesn't adjust its testimony based on how confident you appear. The fracture pattern doesn't care about your professional standing. Dr. Reyes sat in a deposition and walked through her clinical findings with the same specificity she had applied in Bay 9 that February night, and no amount of smooth presentation was sufficient to make torsional injury evidence look like a staircase fall. Marcus accepted a plea agreement 14 months after that phone call. Criminal charges for domestic battery and child abuse. A restraining order. A permanent record. He lost his commercial real estate license in the disciplinary review that followed. His board membership evaporated before he resigned from it. He did not go to prison, which my granddaughter had hoped for, and had to find her own way of processing. I sat with her when she got the news and told her that outcomes are not always proportionate, that the law does what the law can do, and that the part she could control was how she moved forward. She was quiet for a while, and then she said she thought she already knew that and she just needed to be angry for a little while first. I said that was completely fair. I see her twice a month for dinner now. She is a senior in high school, and she has opinions about everything, and argues with me about them with a directness that reminds me of her father. She is applying to colleges in the Pacific Northwest and thinking about pre-med, though she says she is not sure yet, that she wants to decide based on what she actually wants, rather than what someone else has planned for her. I told her that was the wisest approach I had ever heard. Her mother and I have rebuilt something. It took difficult conversations about accountability and about the guilt that lives in the gap between what a person intended to do and what they actually did. My daughter is in therapy. She is learning to trust her own perceptions again, which is harder than it sounds after years of being quietly trained not to. She looks less tired than she did. Last month, she told me that she had started meeting her sister for dinner once a month. That Diane had driven up from Eugene and they had gone to a restaurant and talked until the place closed around them. She said it in the particular way people report something ordinary that was quietly momentous. I still volunteer on Thursday afternoons with a program in Bend that trains teachers and pediatric nurses and school counselors to recognize the signs of domestic violence in young patients and students, not just the obvious presentations, but the quiet ones. The child who flinches at certain movements. The teenager who checks someone else's reaction before answering a simple question. The parent who tells a consistent story in a tone that has been rehearsed. I tell them that 28 years in an emergency room taught me to recognize acute crises. The things that arrive loudly, demanding immediate attention. But the hardest cases, the ones that haunted me longest, were never the loud ones. They were the presentations that didn't announce themselves. The patient who sat quietly and said everything was fine and had learned to believe it. The child who had called everyone who should have helped them and had been gently, reasonably told that they were overreacting. I tell the counselors in those Thursday sessions, when a child finds the courage to say something is wrong, your job is not to evaluate whether it's convenient to believe them. Your job is to believe them first and work backward from there. My granddaughter still has my number at the top of her contacts. She texts me about college applications and the books she is reading, and occasional observations about things that happened at school that she thought I would find interesting. She almost never calls, but when she does call, I answer on the first ring. That is the only protocol that matters.